We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff. Annie, we unfortunately once again have to start with another Pathetico performance from Pathetico Madrid on Monday. I don't know what happened. I mean, last season we were great. This season, Pathetico.
Yeah, I actually genuinely don't know what happened.
Yeah.
It is a completely different team, even though we have 75% of the same players.
Yep.
But you know, can't blame anyone here for this.
Except for me.
No, you can't blame Brendan.
Well.
But we did debunk your theory of the fact that we were 0-2 in the games that you missed, because now we are.
Yeah. Now we keep losing.
Yeah.
Even when I'm there.
Which I called it. It wasn't the commentator.
We didn't know. We didn't know. Now we know. But we didn't know before. But no, another not great performance from Pathetico Madrid. But I did beat two of our Pathetico teammates in rec basketball last night.
Oh, let's talk about that one.
So things are looking up for me, just not for the rest of Pathetico
of
Madrid. But we'll see next season. I know
season is over for us, but indoor.
I know our listeners are going to be really interested in what happens in a few weeks with our new season. So don't worry, listeners. We will keep you informed on our rec soccer team. But we have plenty to talk about today, because for the second consecutive podcast, the Orioles have made a signing that we get to discuss, and I think we can officially put our free agent frenzy dead in the water. Yeah. I think it's done, because we had a few categories that the Orioles needed to fill, and they have filled 3 of them in the form of pitching depth. No, neither of us were correct on which player we thought they would sign. And I think in the form of Tomoyuki Sugano, the pitcher that we're going to talk about today, that's not a player that either of us had on our radars as somebody that the Orioles could add for pitching depth. He wasn't on a lot of people's radars, but the Orioles land a 35-year-old 3-time MVP in the NPB, Japanese pitching legend in Sugano.
Yeah, this is kind of, like you mentioned, was flying under the radar for us, but it does fill that need in kind of a back-end rotation starting pitcher, which is clearly something that we talked about the O's will need. And I think when you look at it in the face value of, okay, with Sugano, the Orioles starting rotation is better than it was the days before they signed him. And I think that that's really important to think about, because this is a very highly decorated starting pitcher in Japan. His walk rate is insane, 2.6%. That's 0.9 Ks per 9 innings, which is really, really incredible. And like you mentioned, just very decorated, 2-time winner of the Japan version of the Cy Young Award, 1.67 ERA in 2024. So he does improve the starting rotation no matter where he slots in. I do think it will be towards the back end of the rotation. But I really like this signing, and it's really cool that the Orioles have gone the international route for this one.
Yeah, it's a 1-year deal for a 35-year-old pitcher, so it's not a massive upside type of deal. And I think with what he's bringing to the rotation, it's not a super high upside, but it's a very, very high floor with the type of pitcher that Sugano is. It's a 6-pitch mix, a legit 6-pitch mix. He used the 4-seamer, slider, cutter, splitter, sinker, and curveball all at least 8% of the time last season. So he is going to mix all of his pitches, and he is going to command the strike zone. That is the type of pitcher that Sugano is. And with his arsenal and with his pinpoint command, he's not going to be any worse than a number 4, number 5 starter. I think he's going to translate very well to the big leagues. That being said, I don't think he's going to be a number 1, number 2 type of starter, because even in Japan, he was not a super high strikeout type of guy. He is going to not give batters free passes. As you mentioned, the walk rate is absolutely ridiculous. 16 walks in 156 and 2/3 innings last season. He's probably going to be best friends with Zach Eflin. The Orioles might have the 2 pitchers in baseball that hate walks the most. This starting rotation just will not walk you. But with the stuff, it's a 92, 93 mile an hour fastball that he doesn't use a ton. It's going to be about 30% of the time fastball and a lot of off-speed stuff. I think the Orioles will emphasize his off-speed stuff even more because it's not an overwhelmingly commanding fastball. He probably won't strike out more than 7-8 guys per 9 innings, but he's not going to walk anybody, and the ERA is not going to be monstrous. So he is pretty much the perfect definition of good pitching depth, where he's going to come in and he's going to be a number 3, number 4 type of guy. He might not be an ace, but he is just going to be a solid innings-eating type of pitcher in your 4 or 5 slot, wherever you need him to be.
Yeah, and I think it's needed, too, to bring in another, like you mentioned, you have Eflin, who definitely is one of the leading MLB pitchers in terms of low walk rates.
Yep.
So I think it's really good to complement that with a back end of the rotation, another guy in Sugano who is the same fashion, because we do know that the O's are sometimes, like, if there's no command, they're much more preferred, like, for stuff guys. And to have these 2 pitchers that bring that element of having elite control is huge into this rotation. And I do think you're right. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but this does not fill the need for that number 1, even number 2 guy. But as it stands, if you have Eflin, Rodriguez, either 1 or 2, Dean Kramer, Sugano, and then Suarez, I think, would fit into the number 5 or number 4 or one of the 2. I think that's a really kind of, you're happy about that. You do still want a number 1 ace kind of guy, but you're happy with how it is.
Yeah, I think as the rotation currently stands, you feel like it's a rotation that can get you into the playoffs, and we'll discuss the rotation further, but I think you're still looking for the number 1, number 2 type of guy to really elevate you in the postseason, whereas Sugano more so fits the mold of a Dean Kramer type of pitcher, where it's a really solid number 3, number 4, but it's not necessarily an ace that's going to get you over the hump in the postseason. But in Sugano, you have a really cerebral pitcher. There was a great article from Ken Rosenthal about the approach that the Orioles took to signing Sugano, where a lot of the time when you're in the international market and you are trying to convince, a player from Japan to come to the United States to pitch in Major League Baseball, a lot of the time you're selling them on the city where the team is located, where, the city can offer you this, and it would be a great experience to come to the States, and, your family can have these perks and all of those different things. But for Sugano, it seemed like the Orioles' approach was really just, hey, this is a good young baseball team. You have a chance to succeed here, to win here, potentially win a World Series here. And apparently it was a long conversation with guys like Mike Elias. Mike Snyder is very involved internationally, the Orioles pitching coaches, and they were just kind of talking shop with Sugano for a while, where they were talking to him about his pitch mix, talking to him about different things that he could change, why he's made certain tweaks in Japan to become the pitcher that he has been. I mean, he just had arguably the best season of his career at age 34. And so Sugano, apparently, according to Ken Rosenthal in this article, just really appreciated what the Orioles brought to him baseball-wise. The Orioles loved the way that Sugano talked about pitching and how excited he was to join the Orioles, to be able to take the information that they had to make him better, how he thought he could succeed in the majors. So I thought that was cool as well, where they weren't just necessarily selling him on the city of Baltimore and being able to come over as an international player. It was more of a, hey, you're entering your age 35 season towards the tail end of your career. You can still make a name for yourself here. He's one of the most accomplished pitchers in Japanese history in the NPB, but you can still do some really great things in the big leagues, and we think you can help us win a World Series.
And it's funny to think that he's coming into the big leagues as a rookie, but he's like literally 35 years old. But I think that actually makes it very, very cool. You kind of know what you're going to get from Sugano, as opposed to like, okay, Roki Sasaki, 19 years old, or right? Is that 19? Or 22? It's either 19 or 22.
He's very young.
Very young, regardless. But with him, you kind of like, you're bringing him in. Yes, Sasaki's going to be a very huge piece.
23.
Okay, 23. To add to any team. But with Sugano, you know how he's performed in the second best professional baseball league in the world.
Yeah.
You know his numbers. Just kind of a veteran that you know what you're going to get when you bring him in. And yes, you may think like, okay, American hitters are going to be different from Japanese hitters, which is true. He did kind of make his debut facing American hitters back in 2017 in the World Baseball Classic. He only had one unearned run across 6 innings in that semifinal between Japan and the U.S. So that was just kind of like a little glimpse. I mean, yes, that was a long time ago, but even at that age, only one earned run against American hitters, that just kind of goes to show, like, you kind of know what you're going to get from Sugano.
Yeah, and important to note there, too, that the NPB is an outstanding league. If you're wondering how this translates, I think most folks view the NPB as better than AAA. Like, it's somewhere probably still slightly below Major League Baseball, and it is a little bit of a step up, but it is not as large of a gap between AAA and the majors.
Sure.
The NPB is an excellent league. And if you're wondering, too, why Sugano had not been in the majors already, Sugano was planning to be posted during COVID, and then all that got screwed up because it was COVID. So he ended up staying in Japan and pitching there rather than coming over to Major League Baseball. But it's an outstanding pitch mix. Shout out to Lance Brozdowski on Twitter. Posted a great thread of his pitch breakdown. Some stats that jumped out to me about Sugano: his four-seam fastball has a 70% in-zone rate, which is insane. I mean, that is absolutely pounding the strike zone. And the four-seamer, he's not going to use a ton, as mentioned. It sits 92, 93, but he puts it in the strike zone all the time. So this is a pitcher who is going to get ahead with consistency. On the other hand, his splitter has a 10% in-zone rate, which is hilarious. It is pretty much exclusively an out-of-the-zone pitch, getting hitters to chase. It has a 50% chase rate, a 40% swing and miss rate. So that is going to be his biggest strikeout pitch. He's not a massive strikeout pitcher, but that is still a really, really good strikeout pitch. His curveball is his best chase pitch. It has a 60% chase rate. And again, it is a legitimate 6-pitch mix. He's going to use the cutter against left-handers to neutralize some contact. The usage on the four-seamer, not going to be super high. The velocity really isn't there. But as mentioned, it is a high floor piece, not necessarily a super high ceiling, but you know exactly what you're getting. He's going to pound the zone. He's not going to walk guys. Yes, he's not going to strike out a ton of batters, but he fits in very, very well as a number 3, number 4. He might not be better than that number 3, but he certainly will not be worse than number 5. And you mentioned the rotation. As it stands right now, I think you have a very, very solid 4 with Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Sugano, and Dean Kramer. One of Trevor Rogers, Cade Povich, Albert Suarez, Chase McDermott, as it currently stands, probably competing for the 5th spot in the rotation. You have Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, who are hopefully going to be factors at some point during the season, but you can't count on those guys at this point. We really hope that Kyle Bradish comes back and is an ace type of pitcher in July or August or whatever his timeline is, but you can't count on that going into the season, going into the postseason, because you just never know with lengthy injuries like that. Tyler Wells, same sort of thing. He could come back and be in the rotation. He could also come back and be a solid bullpen piece. He has been that in Baltimore before. So, yes, while those two guys could be factors down the stretch, and you have guys like Rogers, Povich, Suarez, McDermott, who could be solid number 5s, Sugano more so adds to the back-end depth rather than the top-end starting pitcher that we've discussed.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that, yes, a lot of people were kind of hoping for news on Monday night to be for Corbin Burns or a true ace back into the rotation for a signing. But it is very important to remember that you and I had discussed a back-end starting rotation piece as very much a need for this offseason, because we all saw what happened last season where we thought the rotation was set and then 2-3 guys go down to injury and are out. So the Orioles had to kind of maneuver and move some pieces around for who are they going to bring up from AAA and who are they going to sign at the trade deadline and whatnot to kind of fill that starting rotation. This just as much solves a need that the Orioles had in this offseason as it were to if they were going to get a front-end starting pitcher, which I still think is in the works. I don't think that they end here for sure, but I think that this is very, very important to remember that you're getting Sugano. It fills a need for that back-end starting piece, and it also kind of solidifies more depth for if injuries were to happen in the season.
Yeah, you are never going to go through a season with 5 starting pitchers. That's just not how it's going to work ever, regardless of injuries, really. At times, you will have guys that just need a break, arms-wise. Like, at best, you will have 6 or 7 starting pitchers to get you through a season. At worst, you might have 10, 11, 12, 13. So right now, I think you are looking at a group of 8 at least that will probably make starts for the Orioles this year. In Eflin, Rodriguez, Sugano, Kramer, Rogers, Povich, McDermott, Suarez. I think all 8 of those guys are probably starters for you at some point. Kyle Bradish, I think, makes 9. But you still need, I think, as you said, one of those front-end guys. I think Eflin, Rodriguez, Sugano, and Kramer are all very solidly in. You would like to see what you have out of Trevor Rogers. I mean, Mike Elias has said that he kind of wore down fatigue-wise at the end of last year and is a firm believer that we have not seen the best of Trevor Rogers. This was an all-star a few seasons ago. You gave up 2 good prospects in Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby to get him. I think you would like to see what you have out of him, and I think he is going to be given every opportunity to earn a starting rotation spot going into next season. Cade Povich, same thing. You saw some great flashes from him last year. You want to see what you have in both of those guys, but it's a similar discussion that we were having with Heston Kjerstad when we talked about the Tyler O'Neill signing, which was, yes, you want to see what you have in some of these guys, but you are also a team that is competing in the AL East. You are competing for a division title and hopefully competing for a World Series. So as much as you want to see what you have out of a Heston Kjerstad, a Cade Povich, a Trevor Rogers you can throw into that conversation, even though he's not, a pure prospect like those 2 guys, you can't really carve out space for them when you are trying to win as many games as the Orioles expect to win. You want to see them, and I'm sure they will have roles at some point, but you're expected to win 90-plus games. You're expected to make the playoffs. You're expected to make a push. And so you can't carve out roles for those guys. They have to earn it based on their starts.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that we mentioned last week that Brandon Hyde said. You just bring in as much talent as possible.
Right.
And I think bringing in Sugano does that for this starting rotation. Again, I said this at the beginning. This rotation is better than what it was on Sunday before they signed Sugano. And I think it's just going to make it better, and it's also going to make, like you said, Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Trevor Rogers kind of push to make that spot as well, just knowing that they have a little bit more heightened competition.
Yeah.
And while Sugano was a true ace and one of the best ace pitchers in Japan, yes, he's 35 years old, and he might not be that starting ace guy in MLB now, but I think the command that you're getting, his experience, the veteran status, his kitchen sink arsenal is just, it's insane. And I'm really excited to see him and especially see that splitter against U.S. hitters.
Yeah, I mean, he is going to be incredibly solid right away. This is a great veteran presence, and you know what you're getting out of him. Craig on Facebook also asking, could Sugano potentially attract Roki Sasaki to the O's? I don't think it's the reason that you bring in Sugano, but it definitely doesn't hurt. I mean, Roki Sasaki, if Corbin Burnes is the prize of free agency, which I think he is, Sasaki is probably the 1B to Corbin Burnes 1A right now. Sasaki is thought to be a bona fide ace type of pitcher. He is just entering his age 23 season. He was posted from the KPB. I mean, you want to talk about Sugano and the fact that he's more of a command guy over a stuff guy. Sasaki is a stuff guy.
Yeah.
I mean, fastball can reach up to 102. Struck out 10.5 batters per 9 last season. In his age 21 season, he struck out 13.5 batters per 9 innings. I mean, you saw him facing American talent for Team Japan not too long ago. So Sasaki is the guy. And it is going to take a lot to be able to bring him in. But one of the things that Sasaki has said, which is the reason that a lot of people have linked him to places like the Dodgers, is that he would like to go to a team that has a Japanese player, just, for a little bit of a sense of community. Like, you get it. Like, he is coming over from Japan. He's just 23 years old. He would like to come to a team that has a Japanese player on it, just for, to have somebody that he knows, has a relationship with, can communicate well with. Sugano is one of the most well-established pitchers in Japanese history. He's a 3-time MVP. So not that it completely changes the Sasaki discussion, but I think this puts you in a better position for him if the Orioles are going to make that push. And if you're talking about a number 1, number 2 type of pitcher, Sasaki has every possibility to be that guy. So while the Sugano signing is not just a, hey, we're going to get him for the sole purpose of getting Sasaki, Sugano is a great addition on his own, but it definitely helps your case.
Yeah, and I don't think it's one of those conversations where we had with, okay, you get Tyler O'Neill, that most likely means you don't get Santander. I think this is different where it's not like, okay, you get Sugano, that means you don't get Sasaki. I think it's kind of the opposite,
right,
where it makes it more likely, like you were saying. And that would be really, really cool to see both of them come to Baltimore. And you're right, it just simply like helps the case to bring in Sasaki and have that kind of duo in the starting rotation would be actually like just so unique and so cool.
Yeah, and he would be that number 1, number 2 type of guy. And on the market right now, it is really Sasaki and Corbin Burns. And Sugano profiles as a really solid number 3, number 4. You have a few of those guys right now. Dean Kramer is a number 3, number 4. Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez, I think, are both solidly number 2, number 3 type of pitchers in the big leagues. Grayson Rodriguez could develop into a number 1 for you. That is the kind of upside that he has, and he could certainly get there this season. I mean, he was trending in the right direction last year to be a number 1 type of guy. I think that is the kind of upside that he has. He just hasn't proven it yet. So when we're talking about an ace type of pitcher, Grayson Rodriguez could absolutely be that. We just haven't seen it for long stretches of time at the big league level. He was excellent last year. He is a very, very good number 2, but he's just not the shutdown ace type of guy that Corbin Burns was last year. Kyle Bradish, I think you can say the same thing. Former top 5 AL Cy Young finisher. Dealt with injuries last year, but still looked excellent when he was on the field. If Kyle Bradish comes back and is 100% healthy and is the Kyle Bradish that we saw a few seasons ago, then yeah, that is a number 1, number 2 type of starter, and you feel good about what you have at the top of the rotation with Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez. That is an excellent 1-2 punch with Zach Eflin and Sugano and Kramer being a really, really good 3-4-5. So you could make a case that down the stretch of the season, if Grayson Rodriguez develops the way that you want him to, if Kyle Bradish comes back and is 100%, then yeah, maybe you don't need a number 1 type of guy. But you don't know what Bradish is going to be when he comes back. You hope for the best, but it is a long recovery from injury, is a tough injury to come back from anytime you get TJ. Grayson Rodriguez, you hope that he develops into the type of pitcher that we have seen flashes of from the last few seasons, but again, this is a team that expects to win 90-plus games, expects to make the playoffs, to make a push. Is Grayson Rodriguez the guy that is ready to step up and be the number 1 in the rotation? I don't know. He could be. I would put my money on the fact that somebody like Corbin Burns or Sasaki is ready to be that guy right now. So while Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish have that upside, you're still looking for that top of the rotation guy.
Yeah, you're 100% still looking for that ace to bring into Baltimore. I think that this should not, bringing in Sugano should not be the only starting pitcher that the O's get this offseason. And while Corbin Burns and Sasaki might be a different kind of route to get them, there's some other guys that we've talked about or not talked about as much because we were kind of on the free agent market a lot, but there's another way to kind of get those potential ace starting pitchers via trade.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the next best options after Burns and Sasaki would be ways to get them through trade. I mean, you have Dylan Cease. He's entering his walk year. Luis Castillo under team control through 2027. Framber Valdez entering his walk year as well. And then, of course, Corbin Burns. I think those are kind of Corbin Burns. Obviously, you would get him through free agency. But I think that those are kind of the other starting pitchers on the radar, whether you get them for a Burns status at free agency, a very, very expensive deal, or one of those other guys via trade. I guess that's what we'll find out in the next few months.
Yeah, the farm system for the Orioles is just not as deep as it has been in years past, which makes it more difficult to deal for one of those guys. You're probably going to have to move big league talent if you were going after a Dylan Cease or a Framber Valdez or Luis Castillo. That being said, a team like the Mariners that really needs big league hitters, you could probably find a trade that matches up for Luis Castillo. Framber Valdez, probably the same thing, where the Astros are looking for bats right now with Alex Bregman as a free agent. So you could potentially make something work with guys that are either close to big league ready or are already established big league hitters. But the Orioles would probably have to dip into some big league talent if they're going to make any of those moves. There are other free agents outside of Burns and Sasaki that would profile as, number one, number two type of guys. Sean Manaea, we have talked about a lot. This is a completely different pitcher for the Mets last season. Completely tweaked his mechanics, overhauled his arm angle. So it's not a massive track record of success with Manaea, where he was good early in his career. Mechanics weren't really there, but then last year really turned things around. If you believe that last year with a 3.47 ERA and over 9 strikeouts per 9 is the type of pitcher that Manaea can consistently be, then he is a Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez type of solid number 2. And while he might not be the bona fide ace number 1 type of pitcher, having 3 number 1, number 2 type of guys in Manaea, Eflin, and Rodriguez is a good place to be. Also an interesting conversation to be had with Jack Flaherty.
Yeah,
where
very interesting.
Flaherty, look, we all know how the Jack Flaherty experiment went in Baltimore. It was not great. After being traded from St. Louis, he had a 6.75 ERA for the Orioles. He didn't make the playoff rotation. He was coming out of the bullpen. It was not the trade deadline acquisition that you hoped for. He signs a 1-year prove-it deal in Detroit, has a 2.95 ERA there, gets traded to the Dodgers, has a 3.58 in 10 starts, helps them win a World Series. He was excellent, and he looked like the kind of pitcher that he was early on in his career in St. Louis. Do you believe that Jack Flaherty's struggles in Baltimore were just because he was worn down a little bit and the mechanics weren't where they wanted to be and all of that different stuff? Then bring him back. If you want a reunion, then great. Are you more on the side of this didn't really work here, we've already seen it, and Jack Flaherty didn't seem super pumped to be an Oriole? Maybe don't bring him back. But Jack Flaherty, at least, if you showed me his stats, like Jack Flaherty would be a type of guy that you would want. But obviously you have the background now of the fact that it didn't really work in Baltimore. Would you still roll the dice on somebody like Jack Flaherty? And then last name that's a possibility, Walker Buehler. A really interesting case. It's funny, Manaea, Flaherty, and Buehler all just kind of have different question marks around them, but Walker Buehler missed a significant amount of time with injury. Only made 12 starts in 2022, was injured, missed all of 2023, made 16 starts in 2024, and didn't look awesome. A 5.38 ERA, but he looked great down the stretch. And Walker Buehler, before those injuries, was a perennial top 10 Cy Young candidate. He finished 9th in Cy Young voting in 2019, 4th in Cy Young voting in 2021. That is now kind of a while ago after injuries, and he didn't look awesome in the first 10 or so games that he pitched last season, but then he found it down the stretch. Entering his age 30 season could be a high upside type of signing who has been a number 1 pitcher in the past. So do you believe that he could be that now? I think those 3 guys all have question marks, but could potentially be upgrades in the rotation.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think those guys would definitely be you're rounding out, you're more so lots of number 2s, number 3s as opposed to an ace, but we've seen that work out for teams in the past, and you can get to the playoffs that way. I really like Sean Manaea just for bringing in a lefty into that starting rotation, especially if Trevor Rogers and Cade Povich kind of still battling for a spot in that top 5. I also kind of would like to give Jack Flaherty the chance. I think that if he's brought back, you kind of just have to look at the more recent stats, because once you look at the background, it just kind of goes downhill from there for his experience in Baltimore. But I think knowing the player he was last season really makes me want to give him another chance in Baltimore. That could completely backfire. However, I think it would be really kind of cool to see him flip the script with how he was in Baltimore last time.
And also it would take two to tango, right?
Sure.
I mean, you're not going to bring back Jack Flaherty if he goes, no, I hated it here. I don't want to come back. Like, Jack Flaherty is not going to sign a contract with the Orioles if he truly just didn't like being here and didn't want to pitch here. If Flaherty is looking at that situation going, you know what, I was just completely burnt out, my arm was falling off, and it just didn't work for those reasons, but I want to come back, I want to give it another try. This is a team that can make a push for a World Series, and I think I can help there. Jack Flaherty's interest is going to determine whether or not he is back, because on the surface level, Flaherty is a good pitcher, and if the Orioles have interest in him and he has interest in it's going to take both ways here. So it's not like Jack Flaherty is going to sign in Baltimore, but he just hated it here and didn't want to pitch here. He has options. Jack Flaherty is going to have a lot of teams interested in him. He was a really good pitcher last year. So if he is coming back to Baltimore, then you can put the concerns that you had about him to bed. He's not going to sign here if he hated it here and didn't want to be in the clubhouse. Like, if Jack Flaherty wants to be here, then he will sign here. And if he doesn't, then he won't. So those concerns about that you can just kind of put aside if he ends up being here. But I think when you look at the rotation, there does have to be a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses. And it is like, you're in the American League East. This is an incredibly competitive division, and it is going to be difficult to keep up every single season. Not necessarily saying that you need to spend with the Yankees, because there are 28 teams in baseball that can't spend with the Yankees. Now maybe 27 with the Mets and the Dodgers. But like, every other team in baseball is going to have a really hard time spending with the Yankees. But when you look at what New York is doing right now, yes, they lost Juan Soto, they've lost Clay Holmes, they've lost Nestor Cortez, but they've brought in Devin Williams, Max Fried, Cody Bellinger on a trade as well. So their starting rotation is a lot better. Max Fried was one of the prizes of the offseason. Their bullpen got a lot better with Devin Williams. Their outfield probably got worse, going from Juan Soto to Cody Bellinger, but they are still replacing Juan Soto as best they can. The Rays, Blue Jays, Red Sox haven't done a ton this offseason. The Red Sox have made some improvements to the bullpen, but Boston and Toronto especially are still throwing money around there. There are still big free agents left to sign. The Red Sox have been linked to Corbin Burns. The Blue Jays have been linked to big-time free agents. So you got to keep up a little bit, and that doesn't necessarily mean financially. It doesn't mean you have to go out and toss $200-300 million contracts at people like the Yankees were doing, because they had a $750 million hole in their pocket after Juan Soto left. But you can go make savvy moves like a Sean Manaea. That's not going to completely break the bank, but it helps you stay competitive when the Yankees are signing Max Fried. If the Red Sox sign Corbin Burns, you're going to want to make sure that you have the type of starting pitcher that can compete against a Garrett Cole, a Max Fried, a Corbin Burns, a Jose Barrios in Toronto. You want to have those front-end type of guys because you have to compete in this division every year. It's a hard thing to do, and it is very difficult to keep up with teams that are going to spend big, like the Yankees and Red Sox that are in bigger markets and have the ability to do that, but you can still make moves that don't completely break the bank, but keep up with the rest of the teams in the division.
Right, like be smart and strategic and almost sneaky, which I think is kind of what they did with this Sugano deal, was kind of be a little bit strategic, where you're getting a back-end starting pitcher that's not going to break the bank. And yes, it's only 1 year, which is what Elias has done with some of the starting pitchers that he's brought in. But I think that this is exactly what you need with Sugano. I also think that a need we haven't talked about yet today is probably the only other need aside from a front-end starting pitcher is still another reliever, and I think that that's also going to be on the radar for where the money goes, because say you bring in Tanner Scott for a hefty sum, like you're probably not going to spend as much on another starting pitcher, and maybe like I don't know if this would actually work out, but Sean Manaea's Tanner Scott. But clearly the bigger need is starting pitching, where you do need another reliever and hopefully a lefty, but starting pitching is clearly the need, and we've known that throughout this entire 2024 season, known that throughout this offseason as well, where if you're going to break the bank, which we're not sure that they are, but they could still, it's more likely going to be on a starting pitcher, which is the very top need still left to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note, too, with this starting rotation, yes, we are anticipating that they make one more move. Ken Rosenthal noting in his article about their pitch to Sugano that the Orioles are more than likely still going to add another pitcher to this rotation. A $13 million deal for Sugano is still a sizable deal for what you are getting. I mean, this is a number 3, number 4 type of starter. And look, if you are talking about wanting to add to this payroll, wanting to bring in free agents, that's what the Orioles have done this offseason. There are plenty of teams around baseball that have not made the kind of moves that the Orioles are making. Tyler O'Neill was brought in on a pretty hefty deal. Gary Sanchez was a relatively big dime deal for a backup catcher. A $13 million deal reportedly to Sugano is a big deal to a number 3, number 4 type of starter. And yes, again, he maybe not going to be the ace of your rotation, but when we're talking about pitching depth, it's not like they brought in a guy on a $2-3 million deal that you are hoping can be your number 5 starter and maybe bounces between AAA and the majors. No, Sugano, yes, we're saying depth because he's doesn't profile as an ace type of guy, but this is still a solid rotation piece in a number 3, number 4. So I don't want anyone to mistake the fact that we're saying depth like it's a bad thing. This is still a really good pitcher that profiles to be a very, very solid pitcher at the big league level. Sugano is not going to bounce between AAA and the majors, more than likely. This is going to be a guy that you hope gives you 140, 150 innings, at least, at the big league level this year. So this is a very, very solid piece. And yes, as a set piece is now falling behind us, that's nice. So yes, while we say depth, like this is not just a sign him to a small deal and hope that he gives you something decent. Like this is a number 3, number 4 starter that is an important addition as Annie catches her breath as a
I almost got
as
killed.
A board almost just decapitates you. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I don't want to discredit the Sugano deal at all because this is a very, very important signing. Because we've talked about his command. We've talked about his kind of decorated experience in Japan in the NPB. An 8-time All-Star and a 1.67 ERA. I feel like that's all you kind of really need to know. A 3.45 career ERA in 281 games.
Yeah.
In the second best professional baseball league in the world.
Yeah.
I think that this 100% makes the rotation better and 100% makes the Orioles better headed into the 2025 season. So not to discredit that how important getting a back-end depth piece to the rotation is, because it is extremely crucial. And if the O's had someone like this in the back end of their rotation maybe last year, things might have gone different with all the injuries that happened.
Yeah.
So let's not kind of focus on more so. They still need to get a front-end starting pitcher because this was just as much of a need as an ace.
Yeah, and we're getting comments on Facebook about the Orioles bargain hunting. They're not. That's not what's happening right now. I understand that you want to go out and spend huge in free agency. That's what every fan of every team across baseball wants to do in free agency. But, you know, we don't know the specifics on the Sugano deal yet. We have seen the reported figure tossed around, but the Orioles more than likely will have 3 contracts in the top 25 of free agent contracts signed this offseason in terms of value. They already have 2. Tyler O'Neill has the 8th highest free agent contract value right now as it currently stands. Gary Sanchez in the top 25 as well. Sugano is going to be in the top 25 as well. So they are not bargain basement hunting at this point. Like, these are good players. They are signing to good deals for high value. They signed a top 10 contract in baseball value-wise. They have 3 in the top 25. Yes, I know that fans want the team to spend, but they are going to do so wisely. They are going to bring in free agents that help the team. And yes, we are anticipating that they bring in another starting pitcher, but they are not just bargain hunting. Like, these are sizable deals to good players. These are 3 good players that the Orioles have signed. So they are not. This is not the Orioles of a few seasons ago where they weren't really competing and they were bringing in guys that you were hoping would just eat innings and be a veteran presence. Loved Jordan Lyles. This is not a Jordan Lyles deal. Sugano profiles as a better pitcher in the big leagues than Jordan Lyles. Same thing with Kyle Gibson. I loved Kyle Gibson. The Orioles brought him in to be their number 1, number 2 type of starter, and Kyle Gibson on a competitive team was a number 4, number 5 type of starter. Sugano is a better pitcher than that. So they are not bargain hunting right now. They are signing players to sizable contracts that are good players. That's what they're doing. I know they're going to keep working, and the Orioles are probably going to add to this rotation once again, but these are good, savvy signings that, yes, aren't breaking the bank, but are still sizable deals to good players.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show that this front office is more willing than they have been in previous years. I mean, this new ownership, first multi-year deal for Tyler O'Neill. The Tyler O'Neill deal was the first multi-year deal in the Elias era, and I think that also is a big step. So to say that they're bargain hunting and kind of playing it on the safe side, I don't think that's the case, especially when you look back at previous years for this club in the offseason. And this is there's still 100 days left until opening day. Yeah. So there's a lot of room to go still. Whether or not starting pitchers or other free agents are getting flown off the board, which they are, but I think that the O's are going to be strategic and smart about where their money goes and trades they make if they do. And I think that that's the name of the game, because if you're a club like the Orioles, who naturally do not have as much money as the Dodgers or the Yankees, you're not going to be dumb about it.
Yeah, you're going to make smart signings for good players, which is exactly what the Orioles are doing, and they are spending. These are sizable deals that they have handed out to Tyler O'Neill. And I know Gary Sanchez and Sugano are just on one-year deals. They are still relatively big money deals. You traded for Zach Eflin last year, knowing that he was on the books for a sizable contract in 2025, right. And he is still here, and they are paying Zach Eflin a good amount of money to be at the top of their rotation for this season. And again, I remember sitting in this chair last offseason with a lot of fans upset about the fact that the Orioles hadn't made a move in the starting rotation, and then the calendar flipped to February 1st, and the Orioles traded for Corbin Burns. So let's
have a month and a half until that.
Let Mike Elias cook a little bit. He is making good signings, good players right now, and we still have a lot of time left in the offseason. There's still a lot of time left until spring training starts. This team is not done making moves, probably ever, but until at least until we get to spring training. Give the Orioles some time to potentially make some upgrades, because it was February when the Orioles signed Corbin Burns. So you never know what the O's will do down the stretch here in the coming months. But I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of The Bird's Nest. Yeah, thank you so much for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We love reading your comments and trying to answer your questions, even if we think your comments are wrong. We will answer those questions too. But if you don't catch us live on Facebook and YouTube, you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on The Bird's Nest. We're going to be taking a hiatus for a few weeks because we know you don't want to listen to us on Christmas. We know you don't want to listen to us on the New Year. So we've got 2 weeks off, and then we will be back on January 8th. Will be our next show. So
sounds good to me.
You don't want to see us on January 1st. You don't want to see us on Christmas, and that's okay, because we're going to enjoy our holidays too. So hope everyone has some happy holidays and a happy start to the new year, and we will be back in a few weeks, and hopefully with some more fun Orioles news to bring you. But big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Klaff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.